let's get started. Our next session is Teaching Equitably in Mathematics, presented by Dr. Natalie Hobson, who is an assistant professor of math and statistics at Sonoma State University in California. She completed her graduate work at the University of Georgia. Her research is in math education and mathematics. We also have Dr. Joel Amidon, who is an associate professor in the Department of Teacher Education at the University of Mississippi, co-host of the Teaching Math Teaching podcast, host of the Amidon Planet podcast, and former high school mathematics teacher. Dr. Amidon's work is focused on leading people to love others through teaching. Welcome, Drs. Hobson and Amidon.
Hello. Thank you, Elaine.
And hello. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So, Natalie, we get to talk about math teaching. Are you excited about it?
Yes, I am quite excited. So Joel, right. I read your brief, so I have a lot of questions actually that I came up with after reading your brief. But maybe just a little bit for the audience. So Joel and myself both wrote a brief on equity in mathematics, focused for, in particular, math departments at colleges, in particular for department chairs. So why don't Joel go ahead and send that link in the chat just so everyone has it.
Yep, I just put it in. I'm going to put it in again. So it's to the toolkit, and then both of our briefs are there. Yeah, I'm here.
Cool.
All right, so we kind of structured this time to one, the briefs are there and they're going to be available to you beyond this session. So we can highlight some of the things that we hit on in the briefs, but basically what we did is we read each other's briefs and we are coming in with what did we learn from each other's briefs? What questions do we have based off of reading each other's briefs? And then what additional thoughts might we have? And then we are open to receiving questions throughout our 30 minutes here. And so feel free to put those into the Q&A and we'll go from there. So let's get into some learnings about teaching. So Natalie, did you have one that you want to start with, learnings from reading my brief?
Well, so one thing I appreciated, Joel, about your brief was the attention to providing context for this work, in particular centering it in certain mathematical associations. So I appreciated some of your quotes coming in from the special interest group on Room, on Room. Also, some of your resources to the NCTM, MAA documents. So that was something that stuck out. I think also I appreciated your brief. It gave a very brief, kind of holistic view of what we can be doing in our math departments. So those were a couple takeaways I got.
Yeah, and just to touch on those things, one thing that I saw was, if we're going to talk about this stuff, let's, and I guess a message that we have is like, we're put in here as a talk to the experts, and like we have expertise, but we can always be growing as experts and thinking about what are our organizations already saying about these topics, and the one that stood out the most was about that no matter what happens, we just can't stay where we are at. Like we have to keep constantly moving forward and thinking about advancing our teaching if we're going to think about this idea of equity within our teaching. So that was something that I definitely wanted to highlight within in the writing of my brief, is that you can't just stand where we're at. Okay. And one thing that I saw in, looking at the different kind of headings that we had within our different briefs is there was common thoughts. So thinking about for example, the incorporating diverse perspectives into the classroom. So that's one thing that I talked about, diverse perspectives, and thinking about what does it mean to be a doer of mathematics. And, and I know from my experience, I was really good at following instructions and responding well to stimuli. When I saw two things in parentheses that was about expanding, I knew exactly what to do. And so I was really good at that. So then I became known as a doer of mathematics. But when I got to, college and was engaging in, real geometry where, thinking about proofs, not from a 2-column fill in the blank sort of perspective, but really thinking about how do I attack this problem? That was a bit of a struggle, and it took some creativity and some things that, wasn't really valued when, I thought about my previous experience in math classrooms. And so thinking about all the different diverse perspectives that can be brought in, and think about being a doer of mathematics, and then looking at your brief and thinking about how do we create the sense of belonging. I saw those as being like connected, and having that sort of idea of like, this is what, doing mathematics doesn't have to look like this just, memorization of algorithms. There's some different ways that we can use to express our understanding of mathematics. And so I thought that there was some common thoughts there across our different briefs.
Yeah, and Joel, just a follow-up question. So you, in reflecting on your own math education, you recognize the shift for you in perspective of going from very procedural to more problem-solving, open-ended. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
absolutely.
my question for you, I feel like a lot of students have that shift change, or that mindset change, when they are in like a math major program, right? When they've gotten into like third or fourth year of math classes. How do you see maybe a way that we can make those changes in like the first or second year math curricula?
First and second year at the university level, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because often our calculus or statistics classes do tend to be very, very procedural. And so, what are some
Right.
ways that you maybe have that you're able to allow those diverse perspectives in?
I think it's opening up and attacking some messy type problems. And I'll use that like a rich, authentic tasks where they're open-ended. So there's multiple avenues in which to attack a problem. And then there's multiple ways in which to express a response, and where it's not quite set up to be, here's the inputs, there's only one output, but to have the reasoning for, there's two sort of policies, and there's some mathematical concepts I could look to analyze those two policies, and then I'm going to make an argument for which one is better based off the mathematics that I did. So in that case, there's not like here's the right answer, but here's some justifications that I could use using the mathematics that I'm intended to use in order to provide a response. And I think that can be a way that to show like, hey, well, I mean, that sort of stuff is what we, like I have 3 kids, and my kids are making arguments all the time about why they need to stay up later, why they get more donuts than the other kid gets. I mean, they're making and there's math behind those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Bring it into the classroom.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I love that. Like opening up the focus of the classroom to be more about those methods and the problem solving itself, rather than on the solution or the answer. Going back, Joel, to what you said about, the connection of that perspective shift to then how that also aligns with belonging in the classroom, right? Like if a student can see themselves as their contributions are important in the classroom, then they can feel like they belong and are welcome there. And I think that's so important for helping students to succeed and to see themselves as doers of mathematics, for sure.
Right. And I connected, I kind of made a connection between that belonging piece that you had in yours to one of the resources I shared. It's an article. It's a pretty eye-opening article. It's by McGee and Martin from 2011. You would not believe, and the title of the article is, "You would not believe what I have to go through to prove my intellectual value, stereotype management among academically successful Black mathematics and engineering students." And it's stories from students, and research within that captures stories from students, and some of the things that they've had to experience in classrooms where there was some things where they didn't have this sense of belonging. So it's to check and see what can we do to make sure that people feel like this is a place to be a part of, that they see themselves as doers of mathematics, and that what they offer within the classroom, these different, and I talk about asset-based perspectives, the assets that they're bringing are valued. And so using things like, there's something called complex instruction, where you're going to have an asset-based perspective of students, and you make public, academic, and specific acknowledgement of those assets, and how that. So like if we have a rich mathematical task that and a student provides some sort of something to help us move towards a solution, whether it's asking a question or they created a table in a unique way that people can see, that the instructor can point that out and then see how that can build on to other thinking and like showing the value that people can provide to the classroom. And it's not just raising the hand and providing the answer. Like there's more ways that we can be doers of mathematics within the classroom. And then that allows everyone to participate and see themselves as doers.
I think that's great. Yeah. I think too, to follow up on that, I think sometimes as instructors, it can feel like this is a huge not burden, but like there's a lot of work that we have to do, right, to welcome our students. And it might feel that way. But in reflecting on, some of my own math, student experiences, I remember the most times when I felt not welcome in the class were just comments that the professor or instructor made that made me feel like I had deficits. So like, oh, well, this is obviously true, or anyone should know this, or these kind of comments that just can focus on a deficit or of a not knowing, right? So even just trying to make those small shifts in our language, I think can really help to not push students out.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, but I mean, and sometimes like people are thinking like, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to go about this? But I really love the way that you provided some simple ways of promoting belongingness in the classroom, like just learning people's names, right? That could be something that's pretty simple to do. Another thing that I'm going to share in a link, there's a little blog post, shameless promotion here, folks, but blog post, but there was a survey that was put out about building relationships in the classroom. And what's cool is it's like a back to school survey, but it's different in the fact that you as the instructor fill out the survey first. So then that the students can see how that they are connected to you. And then you can go in and look and see how you're connected to them too. But already like from the instant that they take it, they get to see these connections. So as you're learning names, the students can see like, oh, they're into, they're into using music. They're concerned about the environment. Like there's these interests that, and those little interests, those little connections are building like this conduit between yourself and that student, so that they're, oh, I can identify with my instructor in ways that I wouldn't have considered without this little tool.
That's awesome, Joel. And so I'll have to look at that. But as they take the survey, then they can see your responses as well, and how they're kind of the similarities that you all have.
Yeah, I think there's a podcast. It was like a podcast associated with that, like Brain Matters or something. It was an NPR podcast. But then there was the survey was free when I put the blog post up. Hopefully it still is. But yeah, those sorts of resources and thinking about how do we make connections? How do we I guess one message is it doesn't have to be that hard. That getting to know names, putting something together like that survey could be a way, like immediately I'm already starting to learn what people's names are. And also just acknowledging that, hey, if I know your names and you know my name, and then we should know each other's names. Like those little messages are also just saying like, we are a community trying to do this together. And it's not just you on your lonesome.
Yeah. I've sometimes been sprinkling student names in the questions that I ask. So like on assessments or assignments, especially if like, oh, I haven't talked to this student much. Oh, I'm going to throw their name in, because we use, names in our questions a lot in mathematics. So might as well bring the students in so they can actually see themselves in some of the stuff we're doing.
Right. Or like the knowledge of something, like, if you're building up those relationships and you're, have those little conversations before class, and all of a sudden there's something like, hey, there's some math in this that might connect to something. Oh, now we got some things we could use. Those are great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Another learning I had, Natalie, was like there was some sort of connecting thoughts between our two briefs. And one of my things was you talked about the increasing access and the differentiating pathways, and like doing some things that would, does put some extra work on the instructor and on to do some different things, or do some different things, like maybe launching a different course, maybe doing providing access to courses where maybe we're eliminating some prerequisites in order to bring down some barriers or whatever. That one of my final things is what we need to provide space and support in order for those things to happen. And knowing that, hey, this is going to take time, and we might not do it. The first time you do it, hey, it might not might not work the way you think it's going to, and to give space and time in order to, hey, we're going to try this and we're going to make it better through feedback and things that keep moving forward on it. And again, rather than, as we kind of started this, rather than just staying still, we're trying something, but having a purpose to look at, well, what are we trying to accomplish with these things? How can we make this thing better? Some sort of like cycle of refinement. And what's cool is being on a course that's offered again and again. Every time you can think like, how can I make it better? How can I make it better? And so providing the space in order to allow that to happen.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because I think too, a lot of departments or instructors feel a lot of pressure from the universities to have, data from their classes that always show growth, right? And as you say, Joel, like, well, we need to be constantly making adjustments, and we need that time to allow ourselves to, okay, yeah, something might not work out. Maybe we need to adjust an assignment or critique our work. I think that's so true. And I think, Joel, that just continues. So the connection you made between giving space and also like changing what we're doing, but then that goes back to your brief on connecting with, math educators. And so I think that's also a great place that in developing those diverse pathways or those new courses or new assignments, I think that we can really learn a lot from each other. Just kind of how we opened up today. We're not experts, but we can definitely learn from each other. So I think that's a really important piece as well, to just, build those bridges, coda things like this to share and listen. I really.
Well, and that's, something too, is that we intentionally didn't talk about our briefs until this time, but then thinking you operate in a math department, and I work in a department of teacher education, both thinking about mathematics. Mm-hmm. And so that bridge of seeing these common thoughts and connecting thoughts, and like how already in this conversation, we're helping each other. And these are the kinds of partnerships that we need to have in our institutions where, and I'll be honest, like, I need to make more connections with our math department here, because, I see some of our students going through some of those courses, and why don't I have better connections there? And so as a mutually beneficial relationship. And so seeing that here, and need to take that lesson to my.
Do you have any strategies, Joel, do you have any strategies for building those relationships? In that, my background, I was, my graduate work isn't math education, but also mathematics. And I know for me, it was oftentimes difficult going between those two worlds, right? Like, math educators think mathematicians can't teach, and mathematicians think math educators can't do math, right? That there's arrows kind of being thrown from both worlds. And so do you have, at my current institution, Sonoma State University, there's a lot of great, it's a great community, and we have a good partnership between the departments. But I'm just curious if you have suggestions for places where maybe it's a more separated departments about, ways that people can connect.
Yeah, I mean, I always think to start maybe even with something that's no stakes and no agenda attached. I'm a big fan of hanging out, and that doesn't sound like a very technical term, but at the Association of Mathematics Teacher Educators last conference, two of our kind of honored speakers there, Marta Seville from Arizona, the University of Arizona, and Dorothy White from the University of Georgia, also talked about this idea of hanging out in classrooms and hanging out in spaces. Marta with parents and communities, and then Dorothy in elementary classrooms. But I think even in institutions, hanging out in each other's spaces just to see what the other person does, how the teaching happens. Because, we can have a meeting and have some assumptions, but how many times, if someone's open to having you come and visit their classroom, that's a great way to make some sort of connections. And then same thing for you. And then to have maybe a conversation then about teaching and thinking about how to have a common conversation about improving our craft, rather than I'm going to come tell you what you need to do better. And then everyone gets defensive and we're not having a great conversation. But to come in and say, hey, we're both here wanting to get better. How can we both improve ourselves? So now we're helping each other move higher and higher in with regards to our pedagogy. And so I think that's, for lack of a better term, I think hanging out and having that sort of conversation, or in finding who might be open to having you hang out in their classroom. I think that says a lot about what the intentions are.
Yeah. And I think we're I'd like to think that we're getting over this, but what about connecting with those instructors that don't believe that they need to improve or don't see an issue with equity in mathematics? Do you have any suggestions there?
I think the cool thing with that is, if you do develop that partnership and you start coming up with improvements and people start saying like, oh, there's some cool things happening in these classrooms, like you develop that critical mass, and I believe changing from within, and then people are like, well, what are they doing? What are you doing over there? And like that momentum can start to develop, versus the other way is to say, hey, everyone's going to do this. And as soon as we say everyone's going to do this, a lot of time there is the pushback. But to see like that, developing those relationships and having people see what's happening, and knowing, again, going back to the original charge, that something needs to be done, and then seeing like, oh, they're doing something and it's working. Now, all of a sudden I see, oh, something is happening in my context right next door, and I can take advantage of it. I can do that as well. I don't think there's a better way to go about it than that. And it becomes very attractive immediately to like, oh, they're creating something here that's pretty, that's working.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So start making changes, connecting with a group to make changes together to then build up momentum and get things going.
All right. So we have some directed to go to the Q&A.
Yes, there's some questions here. So
you got a good one, Elaine?
Yes, I got a good one. This is from Brian Feed. I am familiar with the use of CI in the K through 12 classroom. I am an instructional designer with a math teacher ed background. Many of the faculty I work with balk at the nature of group work due to the free rider problem. I know how to address this, but I would like to hear how you typically convince reluctant others.
Now, you want to take this first, or you want me to do
it? Sure. Well, I'll share my little bits on this, and just so I'm under reluctant others, as in, I'm assuming like instructors who aren't comfortable with group work, or is this?
I think maybe the student, right? I would think the student that's free riding. I think that's what.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience with group work, folks are uncomfortable. Like students and faculty get uncomfortable, like the free rider problem.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right. So this can be an issue. Something that I've tried to do in my own classes is to provide opportunities for peers to share their feedback privately with me, right? So I like to have groups give individual assessments of how their group worked together. So specifically having prompts like, what did each person do in your group to contribute to the problem? What did you do? How would you, if you had like 100% of a pie, how would you break up that pie to give appropriate, distributions to the workload that each student did? So providing a place for students to share their experience, that way they feel heard, they feel like what work they did is represented, and that way I too get a better understanding of how that group worked together.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing with regards to that. But also, rather than you think about the free rider, there's also the no rider, like the person that's, if you didn't do group work, they might not be doing anything. So, yeah. All right. So now we have free riding, and maybe they're still participating, but they're not, engaged fully. Okay. But now think like, how do I create in complex instruction? They have interdependent type problems where there is a individual component and a group component. And so like one of them is like sorting out different things. So like maybe I'm identifying different algebraic patterns, right? And I'm supposed to sort these things, but I have ownership of cards, and I'm the only one that can sort those cards. They have my name on it. I'm the only one that can move them. And so now the task is built so that I have to participate in that task. And if I can find it quickly, I can attach to a complex instruction task that's using that sort of thing. Smarter Together, Strength in Numbers, those are two texts that use complex instruction tasks. But that sort of thing that's built in, like they have to do something. And then now it's part of the group dynamic that there is things that have to happen with each member of the group. So it's like, you can't be a free rider. You're doing something, and it's better than no rider as well. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So we've got a couple more questions here. So Ashoka Chowdhury is asking, is another approach to equity, to mathematics, could it be looking for math and artifacts from their environments?
I used to teach in a very rural space in Wisconsin. And so thinking about the layout of fields and yields and things like that, those sorts of types of problems where it's like all of a sudden, like there's a context in which I am very familiar with, and thinking about a messy type problem that my family has to deal with, and now thinking about how do I apply that within the space. And even if like, well, what if they're not familiar with that sort of context? Well, then they could learn more about the space that they're a part of, right? So it can be that either a mirror to their own experience, or it could be a window to someone else's experience. Either way, we're learning more, either that artifact I identify with, or that artifact I'm learning something about. So I think there's lots of benefits to that.
Totally. And I think that also allows students to also be seen more in the classroom, because they're bringing in their interest, but then also bring the mathematical tools into their own lives.
Okay, and then 10 seconds. If there is one online forum that you can recommend to math instructors, like what would you recommend for exchange of thoughts and ideas?
NCTM has a board where people are interacting. I know that former presidents of NCTM are active on that board, like putting thoughts and questions out there. And there's lots of people. And so I can't remember what the exact name of it, but the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics has very active online forums.
And one of my go-tos, it's less of a forum and more of a blog, but is the AMS blog on teaching and learning. They post a blog, I think it's like every week, maybe every other week. And I find they're really interesting, short reads, and often a lot of comments and interaction you can have there too.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and this wonderful discussion. It looks like we are out of time for today. Once again, I would like to thank Drs. Hobson and Amidon for this wonderful discussion.